Welcome back, Double O's, to another episode of Happened. What Happened? The show with a license to kill and is best consumed shaken, not stirred. Alright, that's 3 for 3 for references. We should be good for a while. Out of all the big licensed IPs that have been video gamed over the last few decades, there are few that have been treated better than the James Bond franchise, which is mostly composed of some absolute bangers and very few stinkers, unless you count James Bond Jr., which you shouldn't. James Bond Jr. A while back, we covered 007 Goldeneye, which, despite its innovations, quality, and long-lasting legacy, had its fair share of bumps and bruises getting to market. The same can also be said about the last major 007 game, Legends. Just without the innovation, quality, and legacy part. Because despite coming to us from Eurocom, who had the most prolific and consistent career in bringing James Bond to game consoles, having made The World Is Not Enough, Nightfire, Quantum of Solace on the PS2, and both the vanilla and reloaded varieties of Goldeneye. Unfortunately, this solid showing was then capped off with our subject today, which, for a variety of reasons, failed quite spectacularly, both in a critical and commercial sense. In fact, it was such a black eye for the brand that it caused Eon Productions, the owners of the Bond IP, to suspend the secret agent from active video game duty for the last 10 years. Wow, so what exactly happened to 007 Legends? The mid to late 2000s saw a pretty big paradigm shift in terms of licensed video games, as the ballooning costs in making bigger and more expensive 7th gen experiences saw profit margins becoming thinner and thinner, especially when they needed to be shared by several big studios and IP holders. While having published a successful string of Bond games, Electronic Arts were scrambling to adapt the upcoming Casino Royale with a third-person action game much in the style of Everything or Nothing. It unfortunately lagged behind in development as the switch to HD consoles was proving problematic, and it was for sure going to miss the film's launch window, which saw EA considering canceling the whole thing. At the same time, the fine, wholesome folks at Activision, yes that is sarcasm, swooped in, offering a $50 million bid for the license. EA had reportedly re-upped their license to produce Bond games to 2010, but the problems with Casino Royale were enough for them to simply want to cut their losses. Whereupon, Activision took over. Now, by this time, the opportunity to capitalize on Casino Royale was long gone, so they tossed the IP over to Treyarch, who had to quickly slap together a Quantum of Solace game using their Call of Duty engine. But Casino Royale was such a massive hit, they couldn't resist making it a hybrid game, with half the events adapting Casino, with the other half being Quantum. I mean, sure, you could do that. Personally, the less Quantum the better, but I digress.
Please don't talk to me like I'm stupid!
Fast forward to 2010, where Activision had expanded their ambitions with the IP, making 2 distinct games: Bloodstone, a third-person shooter for HD consoles, and the Goldeneye reboot for the Nintendo Wii. Goldeneye, due to its namesake obviously, was a pretty big success, selling well over 1 million copies, whereas Bloodstone lagged behind pretty direly in sales. Unfortunately, as we all know by now, if you're not making Call of Duty money and are working under Activision, well...
You expect me to talk?
I don't expect anything from you except to die and be a very cheap funeral.
Bizarre Creations were then shuttered by its parent company almost immediately after Bloodstone's release. You can learn a bit more about that dick move in this edition of Gone Too Soon. So with GoldenEye's performance pleasing Activision's board of directors, seen here, that game's developer Eurocom were tasked with a follow-up, as the latest James Bond adventure was coming to theaters in 2 short years. Now, after a remake and an all-original title, it made sense to dip back into cinematic adaptations, especially since Skyfall was greatly anticipated and would wind up being the most lucrative James Bond film of all time. However, 2012 also happened to be the 50th anniversary of the character's movie career, which is why you saw little nods and throwbacks dotted throughout Skyfall's running time. While Eurocom obviously had lots of experience working on fully formed narratives that paralleled the movies, this next James Bond title was gonna try something different that regrettably doomed the whole mission before it ever even got started. Oh, they were gonna adapt James Bond films alright, but they were gonna take that concept up to a ludicrous degree. Bruce Fierstein, the writer of several James Bond pictures as well as video games, in an interview laid the blame squarely on two specific entities. Because it was the 50th anniversary of James Bond, Activision and Danjaq decided that it was time to celebrate all of the movies. We also wanted to incorporate Skyfall directly into the game, which we're doing through downloadable content. The great thing with this game is that players are able to go back and play Bond's greatest missions over the past 50 years, including Skyfall. There are so many things wrong with this idea. What might seem cool on paper to adapt 5 classic films all at the same time while trying to tie them together with a brand new one, wait, that doesn't even sound good on paper! Making video games is a complicated process. Adapting an IP with a very controlling owner is even more complicated of a process. But trying to pull from 6 different movies, all filmed and written decades apart, is just unmitigated madness. However, these were the mission directives that Eon and Activision had laid out, and Eurocom had no choice but to follow them. Players would control Daniel Craig's Bond, who, after taking a big oopsie off a train following the opening scene of Skyfall, would then recount his past missions over the years once he hits the water. These missions would then be connected together with the most threadbare reasoning, and all somehow have to tie back into the main plot of Skyfall. Each level was one Bond film from every era, ranging from every other actor who had donned the tuxedo. We have Connery's Goldfinger, Moore's Moonraker, Dalton's License to Kill, Brosnan's Die Another Day, and finally George Lazenby's On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is a little weird. Why did they just choose one of his other Oh, right. Now, if you are a very casual or not even a Bond fan at all, most of those movie titles didn't mean much to you. But for hardcore fans, they are often cited as some of the weaker entries, so there was certainly some head scratching going on over some of these selections. Now, I will give them slack for Die Another Day. I mean, it's the worst Brosnan film by far, but it was also his only one which never got adapted into a video game before, so yeah, they had their backs against the wall for that one.
Your mama, and she told me to tell you she's really disappointed in you.
Now, it had probably been a challenge to adapt Goldeneye's antiquated, Cold War-infused plot in 2010, so you can only imagine how hard it was to not make Moonraker's plot and set pieces seem absolutely ridiculous. Because remember, they had to make it fall in line with the grittier, more realistic Daniel Craig era. If Eurocom had been tasked again with translating and updating just one classic film, let's say License to Kill, they probably could have done so fairly easily. This is because you tend to run into the issue of a film script not having enough stuff in it to support a game's typical playtime. It's therefore not too taxing to find story reasons for Bond to kill some guards here or have sex with someone there before dipping back into the main story thread. But in Legend's case, they had to do the exact opposite, make a satisfying mini-movie out of one single mission. Rob Matthews, Eurocom's in-staff writer, talked about this challenge during interviews at E3 2012. It's been something new to us, because usually, we take a film and make it into a full-length game, but now we actually have 6 films that we have adapted. So what we've had to do is really concentrate on what are the core elements of those particular films. What are the great action sequences? Who are the bad guys? It's for this reason that the first main level of the game feels like the ending to another, incorporating an action-packed siege of Auric Enterprises and then Fort Knox, which is something that happens more than halfway into Goldfinger. If that doesn't sound ideal, having to make a cohesive adventure out of random film scenes, guess what? It gets worse. Activision and Eon's contract said that the game had to be out before Skyfall's November release. Now, Eurocom did have a mature developmental pipeline for their games by this point. They would use the same tools and engine they used for the HD version of Goldeneye to build Legends as quickly as possible. Even with that though, they only had 24 months, so Eurocom had to make some concessions and shortcuts. They couldn't lift every set piece, action scene, and character from every movie, so they just kinda had to pick out whichever one they could retrofit into their new narrative. They also had to be filled out with gameplay chunks, which could then be recycled for each film over and over, bearing some exceptions. There was always an explosion-filled FPS action section that saw Bond killing dozens and dozens of enemies in an orgy of destruction, whereupon you would then be whisked away to a puzzle/stealth sequence where you're trapped in a particular area and need to escape or retrieve an item. Finally, you'd then be jerked into a clunky first-person melee bout where you mindlessly swipe at a heavy or final boss. This ranges from Blofeld to Jaws to Gustav Graves. Do you remember him from Die Another Day? No, me neither. These melee bits were very obviously, very hastily designed and programmed, and just amounted to a series of dull QuickTime events that never really changed. And worst of all, they can happen a lot. Now, I said very hastily there, which is the harbinger of the most feared, most intimidating James Bond villain of all time, the nefarious Dr. Crunchy Crunchmonger. Remember, the whole point of the project was to coincide with Bond's 50th anniversary, so it had to be out by 2012 at the absolute latest, but not so late as to clash with the release of Activision's own Call of Duty, which that year was... I don't fucking care. As you can see, these two fundamental problems, a hard-to-pull-off core idea that didn't lend itself very well for video game development, and an unmovable release date, wound up giving 007 Legends the worst reviews of any Bond game since, I don't know, ever? Many outlets cited it as a boring, repetitive, narratively fractured Call of Duty clone, and worst of all, the game didn't even ship with an ending. When it was released in October, it simply stopped after the Moonraker mission. Just bam, cut to credits. Apparently Eon did not want the ending of Skyfall spoiled, so they had Activision and Eurocom delay the last level until its theatrical debut as a piece of DLC. In a very un-Activision move, this DLC was in fact free. I guess they didn't want to deal with the whole charge players for the true ending fiasco that some other publishers were cool with. Strangely, though, this DLC mission didn't contain Skyfall's ending at all. There was a rooftop chase sequence, a high-rise gunfight with an assassin, and that's it. No showdown with Silva, no Home Alone action scene. The level just ends with zero resolution. Like, what the hell was the point of even delaying it then? The bad reviews were bad enough, but there was also a distinct lack of marketing for 007 Legends, especially when compared to Goldeneye, which was shown prominently at Nintendo's E3 stage show and even got golden controllers and shit. You know what also didn't help? This. Whatever brain-dead suit out there okayed this horrific box art should be strapped to a metal gurney with a high-powered laser inching ever closer. Does this box art make you want to buy this game? Who is charmed by this render of a mannequin in the vague shape of Daniel Craig and these blurry screen caps just lazily slapped on there? It's almost as if Activision didn't care about this release at all and put the bare minimum into marketing it, which was exactly the case. Unbeknownst to most, Activision and Eon were reaching the end of their contract, and neither wanted to renew it, so 007 Legends was quickly shoved out the door as a last-ditch attempt to squeeze more money out of Bond's already cold dead hands. The game was then delisted from all digital stores a mere 2 months later in January of 2013. What this meant was that if you later found a physical copy, you couldn't even download the Skyfall mission, like if you wanted it, as it was now lost to the digital ether. If you happen to be one of those sickos that still has their Wii U hooked up and owns Legends, you can access that level, since it was included on the disc. With their Bond license expiring, this was the final nail in the coffin for Activision's licensed game initiative. They would experiment with a few downloadables and one more Spider-Man title before completely axing that entire part of their business model. Who suffered the worst, of course? Well, that would be Eurocom. With the sales of 007 Legends very low at launch and then cut off at the knee when it was delisted, they didn't have enough capital to keep their doors open, laying off 155 employees in late November and closing down permanently the very next month. This all reminds me of something my mom told me when I was but a lad. Activision! Fuck 'em! Fortunately, things are looking up. Eon has sought out IO Interactive to craft their own fully original take on the British super spy, and while there's no gameplay details as of yet, it's safe to assume it'll return to the more sneaky, nuanced roots of the character, rather than the relentless killing machine Activision was happy to push into an early grave. It just would have been nice if two great UK studios didn't have to have gone down with him. If you know of any other examples of scintillating secretive sabotage in the video game or movie industries, let me know in the comments below, over on my Twitter, or take an Aston Martin over to the Flophouse VIP Patreon and become a big boss to give me my next mission. See you next time, and thanks for watching!